3P Learning's significant private companies ownership suggests that the key decisions are influenced by shareholders from the larger public. If you want to know who really controls 3P Learning Limited ASX, 3PL, then you'll have to look at the makeup of its share registry. We can see that private companies own the lion's share in the company with 29% ownership. In other words, the group stands to gain the most, or lose the most, from their investment into the company. Meanwhile, individual insiders make up 21% of the company's shareholders. Insiders often own a large chunk of younger, smaller companies, while huge companies tend to have institutions as shareholders. In the chart below, we zoom in on the different ownership groups of 3P Learning. See our latest analysis for 3P. Learning institutions typically measure themselves against a benchmark when reporting to their own investors, so they often become more enthusiastic about a stock once it's included in a major index. We would expect most companies to have some institutions on the register, especially if they are growing. As you can see, institutional investors have a fair amount of stake in 3P Learning. This implies the analysts working for those institutions have looked at the stock and they like it. But just like anyone else, they could be wrong. If multiple institutions change their view on a stock at the same time, you could see the share price drop fast. It's therefore worth looking at 3P Learning's earnings history below. Of course, the future is what really matters. We note that hedge funds don't have a meaningful investment in 3P Learning. Our data shows that Blake Sandblom Trust is the largest shareholder with 29% of shares outstanding. In comparison, the second and third largest shareholders hold about 20% and 19% of the stock. Matthew Sandblom, who is the second largest shareholder, also happens to hold the title of top key executive. To make our study more interesting, we found that the top 3 shareholders have a majority ownership in the company, meaning that they are powerful enough to influence the decisions of the company. While it makes sense to study institutional ownership data for a company, it also makes sense to study analyst sentiments to know which way the wind is blowing. There is a little analyst coverage of the stock, but not much. So there is room for it to gain more coverage. While the precise definition of an insider can be subjective, almost everyone considers board members to be insiders. Management ultimately answers to the board. However, it is not uncommon for managers to be executive board members, especially if they are a founder or the CEO. Most consider insider ownership a positive because it can indicate the board is well aligned with other shareholders. However, on some occasions too much power is concentrated within this group. Our information suggests that insiders maintain a significant holding in 3P Learning Limited. It has a market capitalization of just $334 million Australian dollars, and insiders have $71 million Australian dollars worth of shares in their own names. It is great to see insiders so invested in the business. It might be worth checking if those insiders have been buying recently. The general public, who are usually individual investors, hold a 16% stake in 3P Learning. While this group can't necessarily call the shots, it can certainly have a real influence on how the company is run. With a stake of 19%, private equity firms could influence the 3P Learning board. Sometimes we see private equity stick around for the long term, but generally speaking they have a shorter investment horizon and, as the name suggests, don't invest in public companies much. After some time they may look to sell and redeploy capital elsewhere. We can see that private companies own 29% of the shares on issue. It might be worth looking deeper into this. If related parties, such as insiders, have an interest in one of these private companies, that should be disclosed in the annual report. Private companies may also have a strategic interest in the company. I find it very interesting to look at who exactly owns a company. But to truly gain insight, we need to consider other information, too. Consider risks, for instance. Every company has them, and we've spotted one warning sign for 3P Learning you should know about. If you are like me, you may want to think about whether this company will grow or shrink. Luckily, you can check this free report showing analyst forecasts for its future.